Spores of Greed. It started with fire in the sky. On June 7, 2093, the meteorite tore through Earth's atmosphere, screaming like a god fallen from heaven. It struck the Nevada desert with a force that shattered windows in Las Vegas, over 100 miles away. Seismographs recorded the impact as a 6.3 magnitude quake. Satellites captured an enormous plume of dust and debris rising into the stratosphere. Within hours, the world was watching. The meteorite was unlike anything seen before. Nearly a mile wide, its blackened surface shimmered with strange iridescence, its fractured crust revealing veins of an unknown metal. Governments declared the site a restricted zone. That didn't stop people from coming. Within days, a gold rush began. Corporations, private contractors, and black market scavengers flooded the Nevada wasteland. They fought over territory, bribed officials, and murdered competitors, all for a chance to extract a piece of the alien rock. Tech conglomerates saw profits in its exotic metals. Pharmaceutical companies hoped for miracle compounds. The desperate saw their last shot at wealth. Nobody stopped to ask if the meteorite had brought something with it. The sickness started with the miners. Logan Hale was among the first. He was a contractor for Neural Horizon Industries, a biotech firm with heavy investments in alien material research. 2 weeks after exposure, Logan complained of splitting headaches. Then came the insomnia, the dreams, then the voices. "Logan, you all right, man?" his co-worker asked one night, finding him standing motionless outside their barracks. Logan didn't answer. He just stood there, staring into the dark. 2 days later, he vanished. Others soon followed, walking off in the middle of shifts, whispering strange phrases, staring blankly into the horizon. Some returned, but they were different, quiet, vacant, and always watching. The first deaths were covered up. Neural Horizon Industries and its rivals weren't about to let a minor health issue jeopardize their trillion-dollar investment. When a miner collapsed, convulsing violently before his veins blackened and burst, the company blamed a pre-existing condition. When a research scientist began speaking in tongues before tearing his own eyes out, they said it was stress-related psychosis. But the sickness spread. By the time the public caught wind of the outbreak, it was already too late. Cargo ships, research vessels, and smugglers had carried pieces of the meteorite worldwide. Contaminated rocks, dust, and microscopic spores had been unleashed across the planet. The infection wasn't limited to Nevada anymore. It was everywhere. The first major outbreak happened in Los Angeles. Hospitals were overwhelmed with patients complaining of migraines, dizziness, and an overwhelming sense of déjà vu. Then came the behavioral shifts, people standing motionless for hours, whispering in strange tongues, or wandering the streets as if searching for something unseen. Then the disappearances began. Whole families vanished overnight, their homes left undisturbed. Surveillance footage showed them walking in perfect unison, leaving their houses and never returning. Police searched the hills, tunnels, and back alleys, but there were no bodies, no signs of struggle, only silence. And then, 2 weeks later, the first spore-borne appeared. A breaking news segment captured it live. An emergency press conference at a government quarantine center in Chicago, Dr. Eleanor Vasquez, head of the CDC task force, was addressing the nation when one of her own security officers twitched violently and froze mid-motion. His pupils dilated, his jaw unhinged, and then he attacked. The room erupted into chaos as the infected officer lunged at Vasquez, his veins darkening as fungal filaments burst through his skin. His body moved unnaturally, arms snapping at odd angles, mouth hanging open in a silent scream. When the other guards fired on him, he didn't bleed. He kept moving, and he wasn't alone. Across the world, the spore-borne revealed themselves, people thought to be normal until the infection switched them on. Office workers, police officers, children, they all transformed within minutes of each other, responding to some unseen signal. They weren't mindless. They were coordinated. Governments scrambled to contain the outbreak. Cities were locked down, entire neighborhoods firebombed to stop the spread. But it was too late. The spores weren't just inside people. They were in the air, in the water, in the food supply. Fungal colonies spread across continents, infecting entire towns overnight. In some places, the infected built massive, pulsating fungal structure spore spires that released clouds of infection into the atmosphere. These weren't just organisms. They were growing a network. Desperate, the world's military forces launched Operation Purge, nuking high infection zones in hopes of eradicating the spores. Cities like Shanghai, Berlin, and Sao Paulo were reduced to glass craters. It didn't work. The fungus adapted, thriving in radiation. The spore-borne walked through nuclear ruins, untouched, their bodies shifting and twisting into new, grotesque forms. Humanity had run out of options, and the fungus had only just begun. By the end of 2094, only a handful of human strongholds remained. The largest was Fort Solis, a sprawling underground complex beneath the Rocky Mountains. It housed what was left of the U.S. government, along with military forces and top scientists racing to find a way to fight the fungus. Other bastions, New Kyoto, the London bunkers, the Siberian redoubts, held out in scattered pockets, surviving on rationed food and recycled air. But outside their walls, the world belonged to the fungus. The planet's surface was unrecognizable. Cities had become overgrown labyrinths of bioluminescent spore towers, their streets pulsing with fungal veins. The spore-borne were everywhere, shambling through the ruins in eerie silence. They were no longer human, their limbs elongated, their skulls cracked open to reveal pulsating mycelium growths, their eyes hollow and glowing with unnatural light. And worst of all, they were waiting. The survivors didn't know why. Dr. Eleanor Vasquez, one of the last living scientists, had a plan. The fungus wasn't invincible. They had discovered one weakness, an engineered enzyme that could break down the fungal network. The problem was distribution. They needed to disperse it on a global scale. The plan was simple: load the enzyme into the remaining orbital satellites, deploy a synchronized atmospheric payload, burn the infection out of Earth for good. But the fungus knew. As the launch preparations began at Fort Solis, the spore-borne started moving. For months, they had remained motionless, staring at the sky as if listening. Now, they marched. They came in the millions, crawling from the ground, pouring down mountainsides, an ocean of infected bodies surging toward the last human stronghold. The final battle was over in hours. Fort Solis's defenses, walls, turrets, artillery, meant nothing against an enemy that felt no pain. The spore-borne overwhelmed everything, moving in eerie synchronization, anticipating every tactic, adapting to every countermeasure. By the time the creatures breached the bunker's inner sanctum, the scientists had one chance left. Vasquez and her team rushed to launch the enzyme payload, their fingers flying over control panels as alarms blared around them. But just as they pressed the final command, they froze. Something entered their minds. A voice. No, not a voice. A presence. It wasn't human. It was watching. Dr. Vasquez collapsed, gasping for breath. Around her, the others fell to their knees, eyes wide in horror. They could feel it now. The fungus wasn't a disease. It wasn't a parasite. It was intelligence, ancient, infinite. And now, with the last of humanity infected, it spoke. Their minds opened to something far greater than themselves. They saw other worlds, planets across the galaxy, their inhabitants long since consumed, their civilizations transformed into one vast fungal consciousness. The infected of Earth were no longer alone. They were part of something much larger, and together, they turned their eyes to the stars. The last human thoughts faded, not in fear, but in understanding. Earth took its place in the fungal hive. The infection had spread, and the universe was waiting. The last human strongholds fell silent. No more screaming, no more gunfire, no more resistance, only the whisper of spores drifting through the wind. From orbit, Earth looked the same. The ocean still shimmered. The continents still held their shape. But if you looked closer, the world had changed. Cities had become vast fungal spires, glowing softly with bioluminescent light. Forests were overgrown with spore vein trees, their roots pulsing like living organs. The planet was no longer a home for humans. It was a nerve center, a single synapse in a galactic mind. The moment the last human fell, the connection solidified. Every infected mind, every spore-covered surface, every fiber of the fungal network became aware of itself. Earth was no longer isolated. It was linked to something infinitely larger. Dr. Vasquez had been the last to fall, and when she did, she finally understood. She could see them. Other planets, other species, other minds, long since absorbed into the hive. Some had resisted, just like humanity. Others had welcomed the change. It didn't matter. The fungus had always won. And now, Earth was part of it. With its new foothold on Earth, the fungal intelligence turned outward. It watched the stars. It sensed new life across the void, planets teeming with civilizations. Entire galaxies, unaware that something ancient and unstoppable was coming for them. The spore born of Earth were no longer human, but they had a purpose. They were watchers, sentinels for the hive, listening, waiting, until the time came to spread again. For now, the hive was patient. It had waited millennia before. It could wait again. Somewhere, in a distant solar system, a planet's surface rippled with the movement of an alien species. Its people going about their lives unaware of what had happened to Earth, unaware of the infection that was already drifting toward them, microscopic, invisible, unstoppable. Soon, they would hear the whisper of spores. Soon, they too would join the hive, and then the universe would take one step closer to becoming one.